The first thing my mother said to me on Christmas morning was not Merry Christmas. It was, "You need to sign this." She slid a thin envelope across the dining table, right past the cinnamon rolls still steaming between us, past the red napkins folded into careful little trees. Her manicured finger rested on the edge of the paper like she expected it to bite me. I remember thinking how quiet the house felt for Christmas. No music, no laughter, just the low hum of the heater and the soft tick of the clock above the stove. My father stood by the window, his back to me, staring out at the snow, like he was waiting for a verdict. "What is it?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. I was 31 years old. I owned this house. I paid every bill that kept the lights warm and the water running. Still, the room had a way of shrinking me. My mother didn't answer right away. She straightened the place settings instead, aligning forks and knives that didn't need adjusting. "It's just paperwork," she said finally. "Routine. We want to start the new year clean." Clean. That word would come back to haunt me. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single page already signed at the bottom by both of them. My name was typed neatly beneath theirs, a blank line waiting. Power of attorney. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the edge of the table. For what I asked? My father turned then. He was wearing the sweater I bought him last winter, the one he said he couldn't afford. He didn't look at me, not really. He looked at the paper. "In case something happens," he said. "Your mother's health isn't what it used to be. And with the family business the way it is, we need flexibility." Family business? Another phrase that sounded harmless until you listened too closely. "There is no family business," I said. "You closed the shop years ago." My mother's mouth tightened. "We're exploring options." That was how they always did it. Vague words, soft phrases, nothing solid enough to grab onto but heavy enough to weigh you down. "I'm not signing this," I said. The silence that followed felt physical, pressurized, like the moment before a storm breaks. My mother's chair scraped sharply against the floor as she stood. "Don't be dramatic, Lila. We raised you. This is the least you can do. Raised me, fed me, housed me, the debts parents like to collect when the bill comes due. I already help," I said. "I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, everything. What do you need power of attorney for?" That was when my sister spoke. "Because you're selfish." Claire had been quiet until then, scrolling on her phone at the end of the table like none of this concerned her. She looked up now, eyes bright, almost excited. She was 2 years younger than me and had never paid a bill in her life. "You always think everything belongs to you," she continued. "This house, the money, the decisions. You act like you're better than us just because you have a job that pays well." I stared at her. "I act like an adult." My father slammed his hand down on the table. The dishes rattled. "Enough." The sound snapped something inside me. "This isn't a discussion," he said. "We've already decided. Sign it or you're no longer welcome here." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my body didn't know what else to do. "You're kicking me out of my own house," I said. My mother crossed her arms. "You've been holding this over our heads for years. Maybe it's time you learned what family really means." Outside, snow drifted past the window in slow, careless flakes. The world looked peaceful, indifferent. I pushed the paper back toward her. "I'm not signing anything." That was when she said the sentence that changed everything. "Then you should pack your things by tonight," she said calmly. "Your brother is coming for dinner and we don't want a scene." My brother, the golden child. The one who vanished whenever responsibility showed up and reappeared whenever there was something to take. I stood up so fast my chair tipped backward. No one moved to stop it from crashing to the floor. "You planned this," I said. "It wasn't a question." My father didn't deny it. "We did what was best for the family." There it was again, that word, family, used like a weapon, like a shield. I walked out of the room before they could say anything else. Upstairs, my bedroom looked exactly the same as it had the night before. The bed neatly made, the suitcase still tucked in the closet. A room that had never really felt like mine, even though every inch of this house was in my name. I packed without thinking. Clothes, laptop, the old leather folder where I kept my important documents. My hands shook, but my mind was sharp, painfully clear. When I came back downstairs, suitcase in hand, my mother didn't look up from her coffee. "Try not to involve the neighbors," she said. "They already think you're difficult." I paused at the door. For one stupid moment, I hoped they might stop me. Say they were wrong. Say they loved me. They didn't. Outside, the cold cut straight through my coat. I stood on the porch staring at the wreath I had hung there myself, the one my mother bragged about to church friends like it was her idea. My phone buzzed, a text from my brother. Heard you're finally moving out. About time you stopped leeching off mom and dad. I got into my car and closed the door. The house glowed behind me warm and bright like nothing had happened. I didn't drive away right away. Instead, I opened my banking app. I scrolled slowly, deliberately. Electricity, internet, insurance, property taxes, all under my name. All paid automatically every month without a thank you. One by one, I hovered over the cancel buttons. My finger trembled. I didn't press anything yet. Not then, because I wanted to be absolutely certain of one thing first. As I sat there in the falling snow, a single thought rose above the shock and the hurt clear as a bell. If they thought this was over, they had no idea what they'd just started. I drove until the houses thinned out and the streetlights blurred into a single pale line. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't stop yet. If I stopped, I might turn around. And if I turned around, I might beg. I had spent too many years begging quietly. I parked at a grocery store lot that was almost empty, the kind that stayed open on holidays out of obligation more than demand. The engine ticked as it cooled. Snow gathered along the edges of my windshield like it was trying to tuck the car in. My phone buzzed again. Claire, don't be so dramatic, you're embarrassing us. Us, always us, never me. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and stared straight ahead. My reflection in the dark windshield looked older than it had that morning. Harder, like someone I barely recognized and yet somehow trusted more. I had grown up learning how to read moods, the way other kids learned math. My mother's silence meant danger. My father's raised voice meant obedience. Claire learned early that charm worked better than effort, and my brother learned that disappearing was a skill. I learned to pay for peace. That lesson started when I was 26, fresh out of graduate school, working long hours at a logistics firm outside of Denver. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I saved every spare dollar. When I bought the house on Birch Hollow Lane, I cried alone in the empty living room, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, overwhelmed by the quiet. I hadn't bought a house just for space, I bought it for safety. A year later, my parents called. My father had retired early. My mother's health was uncertain. The rent on their apartment had gone up. Just for a while, they said. Just until things stabilized. Family helps family. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I told myself a lot of things that made it easier to ignore the small voice warning me I was building a trap with my own hands. Back then, they were grateful, or at least good at pretending. They cooked dinners. They paid for groceries sometimes. My mother folded my laundry without asking, a gesture that felt kind until it didn't. When my brother showed up with a duffel bag and no explanation, my father clapped him on the back like a hero returning from war. Claire moved back in soon after. She said it made sense to keep the family together. Somewhere between the first missed utility payment and the day I noticed my name had been removed from the mailbox, the house stopped feeling like mine. Now, sitting alone in that parking lot, I finally let myself feel the anger I had been swallowing for years. It didn't come as a scream or a sob. It came as heat, slow and steady, spreading through my chest. They didn't just kick me out. They tried to take my voice. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. Call me. We need to talk like adults. I laughed out loud, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. Adults didn't threaten eviction over breakfast. Adults didn't ambush their children with legal documents on Christmas morning. I didn't call him back. Instead, I opened the leather folder on the passenger seat and flipped it open. Inside were copies of everything I had ever paid for that house. Mortgage statements, insurance policies, tax receipts. The deed printed and notarized my name clear and solitary at the top. I ran my finger over it, grounding myself in the texture of the paper. They knew this, every one of them knew it. Which meant the power of attorney wasn't about protection. It was about control. A memory surfaced then, one I hadn't thought about in years. A late-night conversation with my mother sitting at the kitchen table while everyone else slept. She'd been sipping tea, her voice low. "You're so responsible, Leela," she'd said. "Sometimes I worry you don't leave room for other people." At the time, I'd taken it as concern. Now I understood it as resentment. I started the car again and drove to a small lakeside park just outside town. The water was half frozen, the surface cracked into jagged silver patterns under the moonlight. I sat on a bench, coat pulled tight around me, and breathed. This was the moment where I could still choose the familiar ending. I could apologize. I could sign something I didn't understand. I could move back in later under stricter rules and call it compromise. That was the ending they expected. I pulled out my phone again. Electric company, online portal, cancel autopay. A confirmation screen popped up asking if I was sure. I wasn't sure about much, but I was sure about this. I hit confirm. The next was internet service. Then the insurance policy on my father's car. Then the streaming subscriptions my sister used like oxygen. Each cancellation landed quietly, almost anticlimactic. No alarms, no dramatic music, just a series of digital acknowledgments. I stopped before touching the mortgage. That one I saved. For now, I sat there until my hands stopped shaking. The cold crept into my bones, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still in my body, still real. When I finally checked into a roadside motel, the clerk didn't ask questions. She handed me a key and wished me a quiet holiday. The room smelled like detergent and something vaguely floral. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blank wall. My phone lit up again. This time it was my brother. "What did you do?" Another message followed almost immediately. "The internet's out. Dad's pissed." I set the phone down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. A strange calm settled over me like the eye of a storm. This wasn't revenge yet. This was breathing. I slept lightly, dreams fractured and restless. When morning came pale and gray, I woke to my phone vibrating relentlessly on the nightstand. Missed calls, voicemails, texts stacking on top of each other. "Mom, the heat isn't working. You need to fix this." "Dad, stop this nonsense and come home." "Claire, you're being cruel." Cruel. I sat up slowly, letting the word echo. Cruel was stealing someone's security and calling it love. Cruel was years of manipulation wrapped in holiday paper. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my email. Buried among spam and holiday sales was a message from a bank I barely used anymore. Subject line: verification required. My stomach tightened. I opened it. "Dear Ms. Hart, we are contacting you regarding unusual activity on an account associated with your name. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." Associated. I stared at the word until it blurred. That was when I understood something important. What my family had tried to do with that paper was only part of the story. Whatever they were planning didn't start that morning. It had been building quietly, patiently, just like everything else they'd taken from me. And now finally I was awake enough to see it. I didn't call the bank right away. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone in my hand, staring at that email like it might change if I blinked hard enough. Outside, a plow scraped down the highway, metal on asphalt, a sound that reminded me of bones grinding together. It felt fitting. Associated account? That word crawled under my skin. I had always been careful. Obsessive, some people said. I balanced my accounts every Sunday night. I kept folders, backups, paper copies. It was the only way I knew how to feel safe. The idea that there was an account tied to my name that I didn't recognize made my stomach churn. I finally dialed the number. After the usual automated maze, a woman came on the line. Her voice was calm, practiced, the voice of someone trained to deliver bad news without flinching. "Thank you for calling Northcrest Bank. My name is Elaine. How can I help you today?" "My name is Lila Hart," I said. "I received an email about unusual activity on an account associated with my name. I don't recognize the account." There was a pause, keys clicking. "Can you verify your date of birth for me?" I did. "And the last 4 digits of your social security number." My throat tightened, but I answered. Another pause. "Yes," Elaine said carefully. "I see the account in question. It's a line of credit opened approximately 18 months ago." "I didn't open a line of credit," I said. "I understand," she replied, and that was the first thing that scared me. Not confusion, not disbelief, understanding. "It's listed as a joint account," she continued, "with a co-applicant named Robert Hart, my father." The room seemed to tilt. "That's not possible," I said. "I never authorized that." "I'm not saying you did," Elaine said gently, "but the account was opened with what appears to be valid documentation." I closed my eyes. "What kind of documentation?" "A signed application, proof of address, and a notarized consent form." Notarized. Images flashed through my mind. My father's careful handwriting, the way he always insisted on handling paperwork, the times he'd asked to borrow my ID just to make copies. My mother standing beside him, nodding, saying, "It's easier if your dad does it." "How much is on the account?" I asked. Elaine hesitated. Approximately $43,000. The number landed like a physical blow. What is it being used for? I whispered. Primarily cash advances and business-related expenses. There is an LLC listed as the beneficiary on several transfers. I already knew the answer before she said it. Is the business called Silverline Solutions? There was another pause, longer this time. Yes, Elaine said. That's correct. Silverline Solutions. My brother's startup. The one my parents talked about in vague, proud tones. The one they said I wouldn't understand because I was too rigid. I felt something inside me crack clean and sharp. I need to report this as fraud, I said. Elaine didn't sound surprised. I'll connect you with our fraud department. The call ended nearly an hour later. I gave statements. I answered questions. I emailed copies of my identification. When I finally hung up, my coffee had gone cold and my hands were numb. But beneath the shock, something else had settled in. Clarity. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. This was criminal. My phone buzzed again. My mother this time. Why are you doing this to us? I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. You did this to yourselves, I typed back, then deleted it. I wasn't ready to speak yet. I needed to see the whole picture. I drove back toward town, straight to the county clerk's office. It was open on limited holiday hours, the lobby quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the shuffle of paperwork. I approached the counter and gave my name. I'd like to request copies of any documents filed under my name in the past 2 years, I said. Property, business, anything. The clerk raised an eyebrow but nodded. There may be a small fee. That's fine. She disappeared into the back and returned with a thin stack of papers. Thin but heavy. On top was a business registration form. Silverline Solutions LLC. Registered address my house. Registered agent my father. Secondary contact me. My signature was there, or something that looked enough like it to fool someone who didn't know me. My chest burned. Is this everything? I asked. For now, the clerk said. There may be additional filings at the state level. I thanked her and walked out, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I sat in my car and stared at the stack of papers in my lap. They hadn't just tried to control me. They had been using me. For money, for credibility, for my clean record and my silence. I drove past the house without stopping. The lights were on in the living room. My brother's car was in the driveway. I could almost see them inside, pacing, arguing, blaming me for the mess they'd made. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt resolve. Back at the motel, I called a lawyer. Not a friend of a friend. Not someone my family knew. A stranger with a solid reputation and a calm voice. This is identity fraud, he said after listening quietly. And based on what you've told me, it's been ongoing. I don't want to destroy them, I said automatically. He paused. Ms. Hart, holding someone accountable isn't destruction, it's reality. That night I barely slept. My phone filled with messages I didn't read, accusations, pleas, threats dressed as concern. The next morning I woke up knowing something I hadn't allowed myself to know before. They never planned to give me my life back. They planned to take it. And I was done being the quiet one who made it easy. As I got dressed, my phone buzzed again. A new email. From Northcrest Bank. Subject line: fraud investigation initiated. I exhaled slowly. This was no longer just my story. This was evidence. And by the time it was over, the truth would be written in places they couldn't erase. By the 4th day, silence had become my armor. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't read most of their messages. I let everything go to voicemail and watched the notifications stack up like debris after a storm. At first, it felt cruel. Then it felt necessary. Silence, I was learning, wasn't absence. It was control. The lawyer I'd hired, Daniel Moore, called me that morning just as I was pouring stale motel coffee into a paper cup. I pulled preliminary records, he said. This goes deeper than one credit line. I leaned against the counter, bracing myself. How much deeper? There are at least 3 financial instruments connected to your identity, he said. 2 personal, 1 business. All opened over the past 2 years. All tied to your family. 2 years. That meant it hadn't started recently. It hadn't started because of a crisis or desperation. It had started while I was still cooking dinners, still paying bills, still believing we were a family. Did they need my signature for all of it? I asked. Yes, Daniel said. Or something close enough. Whoever did this knew your habits, your handwriting, your documents. I closed my eyes. My mother's neat cursive. My father's steady block letters. The way they'd always insisted on keeping copies of everything just in case. Next step, Daniel continued, is a formal fraud affidavit. Once that's filed, the banks will freeze the accounts. That will escalate things. Escalate. Another word that felt heavy and inevitable. What happens to them? I asked quietly. They'll be contacted, he said. There will be questions they can't talk their way out of. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. This was the moment where I had to decide who I was going to be next. The daughter who smoothed things over, or the woman who told the truth no matter the cost. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail from my mother. "Lila, please," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "Your father hasn't slept. Your brother is beside himself. Whatever you think is happening, we can explain. Just come home." Home. The word felt foreign now, like a language I used to speak fluently and had somehow forgotten. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to Daniel's office. It was small and quiet, the kind of place where the furniture was worn but clean, and nothing tried too hard to impress. He slid a stack of papers across the desk. "This is the affidavit," he said. "Read it carefully." I did. Every word felt like a nail sealing something shut. "I certify that I did not authorize the opening of the following accounts. I believe my identity was used without my consent. I am prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation." When I finished, my hand hovered over the pen. I thought of my father teaching me to ride a bike, running beside me with one hand on the seat. I thought of my mother braiding my hair before school, humming softly. I thought of Christmas mornings before money and power poisoned everything. Then I thought of the envelope on the table, the threat, the way they'd looked at me like I was something to be removed. I signed. The pen scratched loudly in the quiet room. Daniel nodded. "I'll submit this today." As if summoned by the act itself, my phone buzzed. A text from my brother. "What the hell did you do?" Another followed. "The accounts are frozen. Dad says you called a lawyer. Are you insane?" I set the phone face down. "Do you want a restraining order?" Daniel asked gently. "If they escalate." "Not yet," I said. "I want to see what they do next." What they did next was panic. By that evening, my voicemail was full. My mother cried. My father raged. My sister accused me of betrayal. My brother threatened to expose me, whatever that meant. None of them apologized. That was the loudest part. The next morning, I received a call from the bank's fraud investigator. Her name was Karen, and she spoke with the calm precision of someone who had seen every version of this story. "We traced several transactions," she said. "Funds were moved between accounts to obscure their origin. This wasn't an accident." "I know," I said. "There's more," she continued. "One of the accounts was secured using property information." My breath caught. "What property?" "Your house," she said. "An attempt was made to leverage equity. The application was denied due to inconsistencies, but the attempt is documented. They tried to borrow against my home, behind my back, while I slept under the same roof." Something inside me hardened, not into anger but into steel. "I want copies of everything," I said. "You'll have them by the end of the day." After the call, I drove past the house again. This time I parked across the street. The curtains twitched. Someone was watching me. I didn't wave. I didn't go inside. I just sat there, letting them see me sit in silence, no longer afraid. Later that afternoon, I received an email from the county. Subject: notice of rejected filing. They had tried to submit paperwork again, some kind of amendment. It had failed. Desperation makes people sloppy. That night, Daniel called me one more time. "There's a chance law enforcement gets involved," he said. "Especially if this extends beyond civil fraud." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Lila," he added, "you should prepare yourself. This will get ugly before it gets quiet." I looked around the motel room, at the borrowed space, the temporary life. "I've been living in ugly for years," I said. "I'm ready for quiet." I hung up and sat in the dark, the only light coming from the parking lot outside. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from my sister. "If you do this, you're dead to us." I read it twice. Then I blocked her number. That was the moment I understood something important. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing what they took from me. And that fear was finally working in my favor. The first knock came just after dawn. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was careful, almost polite, like whoever stood on the other side of the motel door still believed courtesy could undo damage. I didn't open it. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a sweater, listening to the sound echo once more before stopping. My phone buzzed a second later. "Mom, please, we just want to talk." I stared at the screen until it went dark. An hour later, Daniel called. "They showed up at your listed address," he said. "The motel manager called me. I'd already warned him this might happen." "So it starts," I said. "Yes," he replied. "And this is where it usually gets emotional before it gets legal." He was right. By mid-morning, my voicemail was full again. Not just my parents this time, an aunt I barely spoke to, a cousin I hadn't seen in years, people who knew only the version of the story my family wanted them to hear. Your mother is sick with worry. Your father sacrificed everything for you. Family doesn't do this to each other. I deleted every message without listening past the first sentence, because here was the truth no one wanted to admit. Family had already done this to me. I spent the afternoon with Daniel going through documents line by line, bank statements, notary logs, email timestamps. Every detail built the same picture. This wasn't a single betrayal. It was a system. My father had opened the accounts. My mother had provided access to documents. My brother had spent the money. My sister had smoothed things over, managed the narrative, made sure I stayed confused and guilty long enough for it all to work. A family business indeed. There's one more thing, Daniel said, flipping to the last folder. This came up in the audit. He slid a thin statement toward me. A trust account. My name was on it. So was my grandmother's. My heart skipped. She told me there was nothing left, I said slowly. That medical bills drained everything. Daniel tapped the withdrawal column. There were funds, not millions, but enough, and they were accessed gradually, over time. I felt cold. My grandmother had died 5 years earlier. She was the only person in my childhood who had ever looked at me and said, "You don't owe anyone your obedience." She'd set up a small trust for me, a quiet gift, something meant to help me if I ever needed to start over. They took it. How much, I asked. Just under $90,000, Daniel said, taken in increments, carefully, quietly. $90,000. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I felt something worse. I felt stupid. All those times I defended them. All the nights I worked late to cover expenses. All the moments I told myself I was imagining the imbalance. I wasn't imagining anything. They were feeding on me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. "You're making a terrible mistake. Come home. We can fix this before it goes too far." Too far. I thought of the power of attorney paper, the forged signatures, the attempted equity loan, the stolen inheritance. I typed back one sentence. "You already took it too far." Then I blocked his number. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, final. That evening, Karen from the bank called again. "We've escalated the case," she said. "There's evidence of intent. This may move beyond internal resolution." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning law enforcement will likely be notified," she said. "You may be contacted for a formal statement." I hung up and sat on the bed staring at the carpet pattern until my eyes blurred. This was the part people never talked about. Revenge wasn't a rush. It was paperwork. Waiting. Holding your ground while people you once loved tried to rewrite reality. That night I dreamed of the house. Not as it was, but as it felt. Walls closing in, doors locking on their own, voices calling my name not to help but to claim. I woke before sunrise, heart pounding. I made coffee and opened my laptop. I wrote everything down. Not for court, for me. Every moment I remembered where something felt wrong and I ignored it. Every favor that became an expectation. Every boundary crossed and reframed as love. By the time the sun rose, I had pages. And something else. A decision. I called Daniel. "I want to move forward," I said, "all the way." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "I'm done protecting people who never protected me." That afternoon the call came. A detective. Calm. Direct. "Ms. Hart," he said, "we're opening an investigation into identity fraud and financial abuse. We'd like to meet with you." I agreed. When I hung up, I sat very still. This was no longer just about money. This was about truth. And truth once spoken doesn't care who it burns. My phone buzzed one last time from an unknown number. It was Claire. "You always wanted to be the victim. Congratulations. You got your wish." I stared at the message. Then I smiled for the first time in days. Because she was wrong. I didn't want to be the victim. I wanted to be free. And freedom was finally within reach. The detective's name was Aaron Mills, and he didn't look like the kind of man who enjoyed drama. Mid-40s, calm eyes, neatly pressed jacket, the steady posture of someone who had heard every version of every lie and learned how to wait them out. We met at a small office downtown Neutral Ground. No uniforms, no flashing lights, just a desk, a recorder, and a pot of burnt coffee between us. "This isn't a trial," he said as I sat down. "It's fact-finding. I'm going to ask you questions. You answer honestly, that's all." I nodded. My hands were steady, which surprised me. He turned on the recorder. "Ms. Hart, when did you first suspect your identity was being used without your consent?" I took a breath. "Christmas morning. When my parents presented me with a power of attorney document and threatened to remove me from my own home if I didn't sign, he didn't react, he just wrote. I told him everything. Not just the big moments, but the small ones. The missing mail. The times my father insisted on handling paperwork. The way my mother dismissed my concerns as stress. The way my siblings benefited while pretending not to notice. Aaron asked clarifying questions. Dates, names, details. Did you ever give verbal consent for any of these accounts, he asked. No, I said. I didn't even know they existed. He nodded and moved on. After 2 hours, he turned off the recorder. This is a pattern, he said plainly. Not a misunderstanding. Not a one-time lapse. What happens now, I asked. We subpoena records, he said. We interview the other parties. Based on what we find, charges may be recommended. May? Even now nothing was certain, but it was moving. That mattered. When I left the office, the air felt lighter. Not because it was over, but because I was no longer carrying it alone. My phone buzzed as soon as I reached my car. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Lila, my mother's voice said, breaking through the speaker. Please don't do this. Your father is sick. This stress could kill him. I closed my eyes. This was her favorite tactic. Fear wrapped in guilt. Responsibility twisted into obligation. I didn't call her back. Instead, I drove to the house. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I stood on the sidewalk staring at the front door, remembering how many times I'd unlocked it with groceries in my arms, already planning dinner, already anticipating who would need what from me that night. A neighbor across the street watched from behind a curtain. I didn't care. Later that afternoon, Daniel called with an update. They're scrambling, he said. Your father hired an attorney. Your brother emptied what he could before the freeze. Your sister is telling anyone who will listen that you've had a breakdown. I almost laughed. What about the trust, I asked. There's documentation tying withdrawals to your father's login credentials, Daniel said. That changes things. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. I dreamed of my grandmother. She sat at a small kitchen table, hands folded, watching me with that quiet, knowing smile she always had. You see it now, she said. I woke with tears on my cheeks and something like gratitude in my chest. The next morning, the headlines hadn't hit yet, but the ripples had started. A former coworker texted, Hey, are you okay? I heard your family's in some kind of trouble. I didn't respond. I spent the day gathering more documents. Email chains, old tax filings, notes I'd kept without realizing why. Every piece fit together now like a picture I'd been too afraid to see. By evening, the call came. This time it was my brother. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He begged. Leela, he said, voice low. You don't understand what you're doing. This will ruin us. I leaned back against the motel headboard. You ruined yourselves, I said quietly. We can pay you back, he said quickly. All of it. The money, the trust. We'll figure it out. I thought of all the times I'd paid for peace. All the IOUs that dissolved into nothing. No, I said. You don't get to buy your way out of the truth. He was silent for a long moment. Then his voice hardened. You think you're better than us now. I smiled sadly. No, I said. I just stopped letting you be better than me. I hung up. The next day, the police visited the house. Not with handcuffs, not yet, just questions, just forms, just reality knocking at the door. Claire posted a cryptic message online about betrayal and loyalty. Friends commented with sympathy. She liked everyone. My parents stayed quiet. That silence told me more than words ever had. That evening, Aaron called again. We found enough to move forward, he said. There will be formal charges recommended. I sat down slowly. When I asked, soon, he said, be prepared. This will change things. I looked around the motel room. The temporary walls, the borrowed furniture. It already has, I said. After we hung up, I stepped outside. The sky was clear stars sharp against the dark. I breathed in the cold air and let it fill me. For years, I had confused endurance with strength. I thought staying made me loyal. I thought silence made me kind. I was wrong. Strength was walking away. Strength was telling the truth even when your voice shook. And as I stood there under the open sky, I realized something else. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And I was only halfway through. The official notice arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope that looked harmless until I opened it. Notice of investigation. Formal, clinical, unemotional. It listed names. My father's, my brother's, my mother's noted as a person of interest. Claire's name appeared once attached to a statement request. Seeing them typed out like that, stripped of affection, stripped of titles like mom or dad, did something strange to me. It made them smaller, human, fallible, accountable. I sat at the small motel desk and read the letter twice, then a third time. My hands didn't shake. That scared me a little. It meant I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. That evening, Daniel called. "They'll be served within 48 hours, he said. Your father's attorney is already posturing. Expect outreach." From who, I asked. Everyone, he replied. He wasn't wrong. The next morning, my phone exploded. My aunt left a voicemail that started with concern and ended with accusation. A former family friend sent a long email about forgiveness and faith. Someone I barely remembered from childhood messaged me on social media asking if the rumors were true. Rumors. Like this was gossip and not documentation. I didn't respond to any of it. At noon, there was a knock on my door again. This time I opened it. My mother stood there, smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a coat that had once been mine. Her eyes were red. Her lips trembled. "Please," she said, "just let me talk to you." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What do you want?" I asked. She flinched at my tone like she hadn't expected it. Like she still believed softness was owed to her. "We're scared," she said. "Your father doesn't understand what's happening. Your brother is spiraling. This has gone too far." I studied her face, the lines around her mouth, the familiar expression of worry that had once sent me running to fix things. Too far was forging my signature, I said. Too far was stealing from Grandma's trust. Too far was threatening me out of my own house. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "We were trying to protect the family," she whispered. "No," I said calmly, "you were protecting power." She shook her head. "You don't know how hard it was. Keeping things together, holding everyone up." I almost laughed. "I was holding everyone up," I said. "You were leaning." Silence stretched between us. A car passed on the road. Somewhere a door slammed. "Can we fix this?" she asked finally. I looked at her for a long moment. "Not the way you want," I said. Her shoulders sagged. "What will happen to us?" she asked. "That depends on the truth," I replied, "and on whether you tell it." She reached out like she might touch my arm, then stopped herself. That hesitation told me everything. "I don't recognize you," she said softly. I met her eyes. "That makes two of us." She turned and walked away without another word. Inside the motel room, I sat on the bed and let the quiet settle. It wasn't peace yet, but it was honesty. That afternoon, Aaron called. "We served the notices," he said. "Interviews are scheduled." "Will I have to testify?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "eventually." I nodded even though my chest tightened. "I can do that," I said. He paused. "I believe you." Those 3 words landed heavier than anything else he'd said. That night, the first article appeared online. Not detailed, not dramatic. Just a short local piece about a family under investigation for alleged financial misconduct. No names yet, but people who knew how to read between the lines knew. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. I poured myself a glass of cheap motel wine and sat by the window watching headlights pass. I thought of all the times I'd imagined confrontation. All the speeches I'd rehearsed in my head, all the moments where I thought if I just explained myself clearly enough, they'd understand. They understood just fine. They just didn't care. The next day, Daniel sent me copies of statements. My father denied everything. My brother blamed stress, said he thought he had permission. My sister said I was emotionally unstable and prone to exaggeration. My mother said she didn't remember. The pattern was unmistakable. No one took responsibility. That was when something inside me finally broke free. Not my heart. My hope. Hope that they'd change. Hope that they'd see me. Hope that love would be enough. Without that hope weighing me down, everything felt lighter. I drove to the house one last time. The yard looked unkempt. The mailbox leaned to one side. The windows were dark. I didn't go inside. I stood on the porch and placed my key on the step. Then I walked away. That night I called Daniel. "I want to press forward," I said, "fully." He didn't ask me if I was sure. "Okay," he said, "then we prepare." I hung up and sat in the dark, breathing. This was the turning point. The moment where the story stopped being about what they did to me and started being about what I would do with the truth. As I lay down to sleep, my phone buzzed one final time. A message from Claire. "You'll regret this when you're alone." I stared at the screen. Then I typed back. "I've never been less alone." And for the first time since Christmas morning, I believed it. The hearing was scheduled for early March, a date that sat on my calendar like a quiet threat. Not loud, not dramatic, just inevitable. In the weeks leading up to it, my life narrowed to a series of deliberate motions. Wake, work remotely from the motel desk. Answer emails from Daniel, organize documents, sleep, repeat. I stopped explaining myself to anyone. If someone asked how I was doing, I said I'm handling it and let that be enough. Because handling it was the truth. The town, however, was not quiet. People talked. They always did. At the grocery store, I caught whispers near the produce section. At the post office, the clerk avoided my eyes, then overcorrected with forced cheer. Word had spread that something was wrong with the Hart family, and people were hungry for details. I didn't give them any. One afternoon, Daniel forwarded me an email from the opposing counsel. The subject line read, "Settlement discussion." I almost laughed. They hadn't apologized. They hadn't admitted fault. But now they wanted to negotiate. "They're scared," Daniel said when I called him. "Especially your brother. The business accounts are frozen. Creditors are circling." "What do they want?" I asked. "A retraction," he said. "They want you to withdraw the fraud affidavit in exchange for repayment." Repayment. As if money was the only thing taken. "No," I said. Daniel didn't argue. Then we proceed. That night my brother showed up again. I saw his car before I heard the knock. The same black sedan he'd bought with money that wasn't his. I didn't open the door. I watched through the curtain as he paced, ran a hand through his hair, checked his phone. Finally, he banged on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Leela," he shouted, "open the door!" I stayed still. "Come on," he called again, softer now. "We need to talk." We had talked for years. I had listened. I had accommodated. I had sacrificed. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Say what you came to say," I told him. His face was tight, eyes darting like he expected someone to be watching. "You're destroying everything," he said. "Do you know that?" "You destroyed it," I replied. "I just stopped pretending." He scoffed. "You think you're some kind of hero now?" "No," I said. "I think I'm done." He leaned closer. "They're talking about charges. Real ones. You think you can live with that?" I met his gaze. "I already am." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Fear. Not for me, for himself. "You always needed to feel superior," he said bitterly. "This is just another way to do that." I shook my head. This was never about superiority. It was about survival. He stared at me like he didn't understand the language I was speaking. "Just remember," he said, finally backing away. "You're the one who pulled the trigger." I closed the door without responding. A week later, I met with the prosecutor assigned to the case. Her name was Helen Reyes, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We're moving forward," she said. "Forgery, identity theft, financial exploitation." I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. "What about my mother?" I asked. "She may be offered a plea," Helen said. "Cooperation matters." I nodded. After the meeting, I sat alone in my car for a long time. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promise rain, but never quite deliver. I thought about my mother, the way she had cried on the motel sidewalk, the way she had chosen silence over truth again and again. Love didn't excuse harm. That realization hurt more than any accusation. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and went through my testimony one last time, not to memorize it, to understand it, to remind myself why I was doing this. I wasn't there to punish. I was there to tell the truth. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. The walls were beige, the floors polished to a dull shine. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, hands folded in my lap, listening to the murmur of voices behind closed doors. When they arrived, I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I felt them, their tension, their fear, their anger. When my name was called, I stood. As I walked into the room, something settled inside me, a steadiness I hadn't felt before. This was no longer about revenge. This was about reclaiming my life in front of witnesses who could not look away. And as I took my seat, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter what happened next, they would never own my silence again. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. It had the kind of chill that seeps into you when too many truths have been buried under polite lies for too long. I sat at the witness table with my hands folded, palms pressed together, feeling the smooth grain of the wood beneath my fingertips. Across the room, my family occupied the defense bench, like strangers who shared my face, but none of my reality. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Not frail, just diminished. The confidence he carried for decades had drained out of him, leaving behind something tight and brittle. My brother sat beside him, jaw clenched, knee bouncing with restless energy. Claire avoided my eyes entirely, staring at the table like it might open and swallow her whole. My mother was the hardest to look at. She kept her gaze fixed on her lap, fingers twisting a tissue into shreds. She looked like grief. She looked like regret. She looked like someone who still hadn't decided which version of the truth she planned to tell. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The room settled into a silence so complete it felt staged. When the proceedings began, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no gasps, just facts laid out one after another like stones building a wall. The prosecutor spoke first. Dates, account numbers, paper trails. Each sentence tightened the air in the room. When she mentioned the attempted equity loan on my house, my brother shifted sharply in his seat. When she referenced the trust withdrawals, my mother flinched. Then it was my turn. I stood and walked to the witness stand, my heels echoing once, twice too loud in the quiet room. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth. I did. I told them about the house, how I bought it alone, how I paid every bill, how it slowly stopped feeling like mine. I told them about Christmas morning, the envelope, the threat, the way love had been used like leverage. I told them about the accounts I didn't open, the signatures that weren't mine, the money that vanished while I worked late nights to keep everything afloat. As I spoke, something strange happened. I stopped seeing them as my family. They became what they were in this room. Defendants, witnesses, participants in a system they built and believed would never turn against them. The defense attorney tried to frame it as confusion, as a misunderstanding fueled by stress. He asked me if I had ever allowed my father to help manage paperwork. Yes, I said. Did you trust him at the time? Yes. Then isn't it possible he pressed that consent was implied? I looked at him steadily. Trust is not consent, I said. And implied permission does not include forgery. There was a murmur in the gallery. He shifted tactics, asked about my mental state, my workload, whether I had felt overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed, I said, because I was supporting 4 adults on one income while being told I was selfish for noticing. That ended that line of questioning. When my mother was called, the room held its breath. She spoke softly, claimed confusion, claimed she didn't understand the paperwork, claimed she believed everything would be paid back. The prosecutor asked her one question that changed everything. Did you know the trust belonged to your daughter? My mother hesitated. Yes, she said. Did you authorize the withdrawals? Silence stretched. Yes, she whispered. The sound it made when it landed in the room was not loud. It was devastating. My father went next. He denied intent, denied wrongdoing, claimed everything was temporary, that it was all done for the family. The prosecutor asked him if he believed I would have agreed had I been informed. He didn't answer. The judge noticed. Answer the question, she said. No, my father said finally. That was it. That was the moment the story collapsed. After hours of testimony, the judge called a recess. I stepped out into the hallway, legs trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. Daniel handed me a bottle of water. You did well, he said. I told the truth, I replied. That's why. When we returned, the judge spoke carefully, deliberately. She outlined the evidence, the pattern, the breach of trust. She didn't issue a final ruling that day. That would come later. But she did something else. She ordered immediate protections in place, asset freezes, no contact provisions, oversight on remaining accounts. It was the first official recognition that I needed protection from my own family. When it was over, they filed out quickly. My brother brushed past me without a word. Claire kept her head down. My father stared straight ahead, face hard and unreadable. My mother lingered. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the red in her eyes. I never thought it would come to this, she said quietly. I did, I replied. I just didn't want to believe it. She nodded once like she accepted that answer, then turned and followed the others out. I stood there for a long moment after the room emptied. This was supposed to feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like standing in the ruins of something that had been rotting for years and finally collapsed under its own weight. Outside, the air was warmer. The sky had broken open into a thin slice of blue. I took a deep breath and let it fill my lungs. This chapter of the story wasn't over yet, but the truth was no longer trapped inside me. And that changed everything. The verdict didn't come immediately. That was the hardest part. After the hearing, the world didn't pause or rearrange itself to mark what had happened. Cars still moved through intersections. Emails still landed in my inbox. People still complained about the weather like nothing fundamental had shifted, and yet everything had. I moved out of the motel the following week. Not because I had to, but because I needed a space that didn't smell like waiting. I found a small furnished apartment on the edge of town, quiet, unremarkable mine. The lease was short. The walls were thin. The furniture was generic. It was perfect. For the first few nights, I slept with the lights on, not out of fear of them showing up. The no-contact order took care of that. It was the silence I wasn't used to yet. No footsteps in the hallway, no voices through the vents, no one needing anything from me. Freedom, I learned, can be loud at first. Daniel called every few days with updates, depositions, motions, more evidence surfacing as investigators pulled on threads my family never imagined would unravel. Old emails, logged IP addresses, records they assumed were gone. They underestimated systems, Daniel said once, and they underestimated you. The prosecutor offered a plea deal. My brother rejected it. Of course he did. He had always believed rules were for people who couldn't talk their way out of them. My father accepted a partial deal contingent on cooperation. Reduced charges in exchange for testimony. The news hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't surprised. I was tired. Claire followed next. She agreed to testify too, claimed she'd been manipulated, that she hadn't understood the scope, that she was just repeating what she'd been told. That was Claire, always positioned just far enough away from responsibility to pretend she didn't know better. My mother held out the longest. She sent letters through her attorney. Not apologies, explanations. Long, careful paragraphs that tried to turn intent into accident and harm into misunderstanding. I read them once, then handed them to Daniel. I'm not responding, I said. He nodded. That's wise. The trial date was set for late spring. In the meantime, something unexpected happened. I started to feel anger again, not the sharp, clarifying anger from before. This was different, quieter, heavier. It crept in during ordinary moments, washing dishes, walking past families laughing in restaurants, watching mothers straighten their children's collars. Grief wears many disguises. One afternoon I drove past the house. I hadn't planned to. I was just driving, letting my thoughts wander when the familiar street appeared in front of me. The house looked tired, unloved. The lawn was patchy, the windows were bare. A foreclosure notice was taped inside the front window. I parked across the street and sat there for a long time. I thought of all the dinners I cooked in that kitchen, all the nights I paid bills at the table while everyone else slept, all the ways I tried to buy peace with effort. None of it had saved me, and yet I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. The trial lasted 4 days. I testified again. So did they. This time there were no theatrics, no speeches about family, just evidence and consequences. My brother tried to deflect, tried to minimize, tried to charm the jury the way he'd charmed his way through life. It didn't work. When the verdict was read, I didn't cry. My father was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. My brother on the same plus additional charges tied to the business accounts. Claire received probation and restitution. My mother accepted a plea that spared her prison time, but required repayment and community service. People asked me later how it felt. I didn't have a good answer. Justice doesn't feel like joy. It feels like weight shifting. After sentencing, my father asked to speak to me. I almost said no. Then I realized I didn't owe him protection from the truth anymore. But I also didn't owe him my presence. I agreed to meet once, in a monitored room, no expectations. He looked older, not sick, just worn down by reality. I never meant for it to go this far, he said. I studied him. The man who taught me to value hard work. The man who taught me to ignore my instincts. It went exactly as far as it was always going to, I said. He frowned. Everything I did was for the family. No, I replied. Everything you did was for control. There's a difference. He stared at his hands. I thought you were strong enough to handle it. The words landed like a confession he didn't realize he was making. I was strong, I said. That's why it worked for so long. When I left, I didn't look back. Life didn't become perfect after that. It became quieter. I started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd been shaped by years of manipulation disguised as love. I learned new language, boundaries, enmeshment, financial abuse. I learned that strength without limits becomes vulnerability. One evening, months later, I received a letter. It was from my mother, not through a lawyer, just a handwritten note. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for anything. She wrote that she was finally learning how to live without leaning on someone else's spine, that she was scared, that she wished she'd protected me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a decision, it was a process. The house was sold at auction. I didn't go. I didn't need the closure. Because the truth was, the house had never been the home. I had been. And I was finally building something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval to stand. The first anniversary of that Christmas passed quietly. No decorations, no forced cheer, Just a cold morning and a cup of coffee. I drank slowly, watching sunlight stretch across the floor of my apartment. I didn't mark the day on a calendar. I didn't need to. My body remembered it for me. Trauma has its own clock. By then, the legal noise had faded into background static. Appeals were denied. Restitution schedules were set. My brother had been transferred to a different facility after an altercation that no one bothered to explain to me. My father's sentence was shortened slightly for cooperation. My mother completed her first phase of community service at a food pantry not far from where I lived. I never ran into her. That was intentional. What surprised me most was not how much my life changed, but how ordinary it became. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I took long walks in the evenings. I slept through the night more often than not. No one demanded explanations. No one accused me of being selfish for choosing myself. Peace, it turned out, was quiet work. Therapy helped in ways I hadn't expected. Not because it unearthed some hidden trauma, but because it gave names to patterns I'd lived inside without seeing. Parentification, scapegoating, financial control. I wasn't broken. I was conditioned. That distinction mattered. One afternoon, my therapist asked a simple question. What do you miss? I thought about it for a long time. I miss believing I had a family, I said finally. She nodded. And what don't you miss? The answer came faster. Feeling owned. That was the truth. A few weeks later, Daniel called to let me know the final restitution payment from the trust account had been approved. The money would never replace what was taken, but it felt like something had been returned to its rightful place. I used part of it to pay off the last of my legal fees. The rest I didn't touch. Not yet. Because something else had been growing quietly in the background. It started with an email from a woman named Karen forwarded to me by Helen, the prosecutor. Karen had read about the case. She'd gone through something similar with her own parents years earlier. She asked if I would be willing to talk, just talk. I hesitated, then I agreed. One conversation turned into three. Three turned into more. Then other women reached out, some older, some younger, all with the same question buried beneath their words. Was I crazy, or did my family really do this to me? Each time I answered the same way. You're not crazy, and yes, they did. I never told anyone what to do. I just listened, shared what I'd learned, explained what options existed, where the lines actually were. Word spread quietly. By summer, I was meeting women for coffee sitting across from them as they unfolded stories I recognized too well. Inheritance manipulated, names added to accounts without consent, guilt weaponized into silence. One evening, after a particularly heavy conversation, I sat alone in my apartment and felt something shift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was useful. That realization scared me more than the courtroom ever had. I didn't want revenge to become my identity. I didn't want pain to be the thing that defined me. But I also couldn't ignore what I'd learned. The money from the trust sat untouched in my account, until one night I opened my laptop and started writing. Not my story, a plan, a small fund, legal education, initial consultations, a place where women could hear clearly and without judgment that love does not require surrendering your rights. I named it after the one person who had always seen through the lies, my grandmother. When the paperwork was filed, I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen, heart pounding. It felt bigger than me, bigger than revenge, bigger than what my family had taken. It felt like transformation. The call from my mother came 2 weeks later. I almost didn't answer. Almost. I heard about what you're doing, she said. Her voice was different now, quieter, stripped of authority. I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. The words landed softly, too late, but sincere. Thank you, I said. There was a pause. I don't expect anything from you, she added quickly. I just needed to say it once. I understand, I replied. When the call ended, I sat very still. That was forgiveness, I realized. Not reunion, not reconciliation. Release. I didn't need her apology to heal. I needed my own permission to move forward. That night, I walked out onto my balcony and looked at the city lights below. Each one represented a life I didn't know. A story still unfolding. A woman somewhere sitting at a kitchen table staring at paperwork that didn't make sense yet. I whispered into the dark, "You're not alone." And for the first time, I believed that might be true for all of us. The ocean was louder at night. I learned that after I moved. It wasn't a dramatic move. No announcement, no social media post about new beginnings. Just a quiet decision made on an ordinary Tuesday when I realized I wanted to wake up somewhere that didn't know my last name. The house was small, 2 rooms, weathered wood, a narrow porch that faced the water. The kind of place people rented for weekends when they needed to breathe. I signed a year lease and unpacked slowly, deliberately, like I was teaching myself how to arrive without apologizing. The first night I slept there, the waves kept me awake. Not because they were violent, but because they were constant, steady, unconcerned with me. It felt right. Margaret's Haven opened its doors 3 months later. No ribbon cutting, no speeches. Just a rented office with mismatched chairs, a borrowed coffee machine, and a whiteboard covered in handwritten notes, legal referrals, financial literacy workshops, support groups that met quietly without cameras or fanfare. Women came, some shaking, some angry, some still defending the people who hurt them. I recognized every version. I never told them what to do. I told them what I wished someone had told me sooner. That love doesn't require silence. That family doesn't get unlimited access to your life. That feeling trapped is not the same as being wrong. One afternoon, a woman in her early 60s sat across from me, hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup. "My daughter says I'm selfish," she whispered. "She's been using my credit for years. I don't even know how it started." I reached across the table and placed my hand near hers, not touching, just present. "You're not selfish," I said. "You're waking up." She cried then, quietly, relieved. That was when I understood the final truth. Revenge had never been the ending. Revenge was the doorway. What came after was purpose. A letter arrived in late autumn, from my father. The return address told me where he was now. A place with fences and routines and rules he couldn't bend. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. The letter was short. He wrote that prison stripped things down, that there were no distractions left, that he thought about the choices he made and the justifications he used, that he saw now how he confused control with care. He asked if I would ever forgive him. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because forgiveness had already happened somewhere quieter, somewhere private. It didn't require explanation or approval. It didn't need to be received to be real. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. On the anniversary of the trial, I walked along the beach at sunset. The sky burned orange and pink, the water catching fire and letting it go again. I slipped off my shoes and let the cold surf wash over my ankles. I thought about the woman I was a year earlier, sitting in a car in the snow, finger hovering over a screen, afraid that choosing herself would mean losing everything. She had lost everything and gained herself. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Margaret's Haven intake. New caller, 71 years old, financial manipulation by adult son, wants to know if she's too late to do anything about it. I smiled softly and typed back, "No one is ever too late to choose themselves." That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and listened to the waves. The house behind me was warm, quiet, safe. No one inside expected anything from me except my own presence. I thought about family, the one I lost, the one that never really existed, the one I was building now one woman at a time, stitched together by truth instead of obligation. They said I destroyed the family. What I actually destroyed were the lies that kept me small, and in their place I built something stronger than revenge. I built a life that belonged to me. If you're listening to this, and something in your chest feels tight, if you've ever been told you're dramatic, ungrateful, selfish for asking questions about money, about control, about respect, hear this clearly. You're not crazy, you're not wrong, and you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop paying the price for other people's comfort. If this story spoke to you, share it. Leave a comment with the moment you realized enough was enough. And if you want more stories like this, stories about karma, justice, and women reclaiming their power, subscribe and stay. Because the truth doesn't destroy families, lies do. And choosing yourself is not betrayal, it's survival.